They were utterly shocked when I revealed I was making $250,000 a year, just as their perfect son destroyed their financial empire and left them homeless. What is up, guys? Have you ever seen a family so insanely toxic that you just want to reach through the screen and shake them? Today's story is exactly that. We have golden child syndrome, stolen cars, and the most satisfying karma I have ever read. Let's get right into it. My father demanded I attend my golden brother's wedding, threatening to cut my tuition if I dared to disrespect the family by not showing up. They were utterly shocked when I revealed I was making $250,000 a year, just as their perfect son destroyed their financial empire and left them homeless. But when he finds out the absolute truth, the truth I have been meticulously hiding for years, he will erupt in a way that I can only describe as purely cinematic. What would you do if the people who had hardly noticed your presence for your entire life suddenly demanded you show up and act like a loyal servant for one day? That would be a very hard scenario, right? I mean, it's always going to be like that with family, especially my own. Let me start at the beginning. My name is Arthur, and if you haven't figured it out by now, my family is fundamentally broken. I mean it. That is, if it can even be considered a family in the traditional sense of the word. What do you name the individuals who gave birth to you, who brought you into this world, but then practically abandoned you emotionally the moment they discovered a better version of you? Can that even be considered family? Instead of going in circles and playing philosopher, let me state it clearly and bluntly. I could have had a happy, normal childhood if my parents had treated both of their sons with even a fraction of equality. But no, my parents, Richard and Eleanor, are a pair of incredibly biased, image-obsessed narcissists who have been treating me as nothing more than background noise for as long as I can remember. All of this was simply because my younger brother, Julian, was the more vibrant, robust kid. I mean, Julian was one of those aggressively healthy, adorable infants who drew everyone's attention the second he entered a room. He had the blonde curls, the bright eyes, the infectious laugh that made strangers stop in the grocery store, whereas I was the scrawny, quiet, painfully average-looking one that no one particularly wanted to hold. But should these superficial things influence parents so profoundly that they begin to establish a rigid caste system within their own home? Shouldn't, right? Any decent human being would say no. But it was entirely different for Richard and Eleanor. Within a month of Julian's birth, he had been firmly cemented as their golden child. He was the infant who received universal adulation and worship. I mean, it wasn't like he was outstandingly brilliant or possessed some rare talent. He was merely the more attractive one. He was instantly designated as the main character of our household, so everyone was naturally drawn to him. Meanwhile, I was permanently demoted to the supporting cast, merely a prop standing in the shadows, entirely forgotten unless someone needed me to fetch something. You can imagine how utterly dreadful and lonely my childhood must have been. My parents ignored me, offering only the bare minimum required by law to keep a child alive: food, basic clothing, a roof, while my egotistical brother let all of that suffocating attention inflate his ego to monstrous proportions. He was a prince, and I was merely a peasant living in his kingdom. Julian grew up as a pampered, insufferable brat who only cared about himself and his immediate desires. So you can probably picture the exact kind of relationship we had. I was the shy, introverted kid who found solace in books and quiet corners, and Julian turned out to be a massive, relentless bully. Could you imagine that dynamic? Being actively bullied and terrorized by your little brother while your parents watch and do absolutely nothing? Yeah, that was the daily reality for me. Julian seemed to have made it his life's singular mission to make my existence as miserable as humanly possible. He would accomplish this whether by throwing wild, calculated tantrums that caused my parents to instantly cancel my plans to appease him, or by physically taking away the few things I actually liked and cared about. It was a completely toxic scenario in and of itself. Add a set of aggressively biased parents to the mix, and you can understand how terrible my upbringing really was. My parents were the primary architects of Julian's awful personality. While Julian was constantly showered with new toys, undivided attention, and excessive praise for simply breathing, I was never given an ounce of grace. My birthdays were a stiff, uncomfortable formality, Usually a cheap grocery store cake and a pat on the back before they rushed off to take Julian to soccer practice. My personal accomplishments were never considered particularly significant. My job in the family was essentially to be a ghost, to not make a mess, and to never outshine the golden boy. I vividly remember one specific time in middle school. I had worked tirelessly, staying up late every night, and I managed to get straight A's on my final report card, including a perfect score in advanced mathematics. I was absolutely thrilled. I remember running home, my heart pounding in my chest. I figured maybe this was it. Maybe I'd finally get a genuine hug, a proud pat on the back, or at least a warm smile. But when I presented that pristine piece of paper to my mother in the kitchen, she barely glanced at it. All she said, in the most monotone, dismissive voice imaginable, was, "That's nice, Arthur." Without skipping a beat, she walked right past me and went on to rave loudly about what a magnificent little painting Julian had just done in his art class. She declared that we just had to put it up on the refrigerator immediately for everyone to see. Yes, Julian's wonky, poorly colored drawing of a dog received center stage, held up by premium magnets, while my straight-A report card was carelessly shoved into the garbage drawer by the phone, buried beneath takeout menus and old utility bills. So you know exactly how things were. I felt like that neglected piece of paper, easily discarded, while my brother was lauded as a genius for basic bodily functions. But it wasn't just the small, everyday stuff. Oh no. Julian got absolute veto power over where we went on family vacations, what we ate for dinner every single night, and what we watched on television. Every time I attempted to express a preference or select something, I was immediately shut down, and that little idiot Julian rubbed his victory in my face to the absolute fullest extent possible. He was the reigning king of the house, and I was nothing more than an indentured servant. But if there is one memory that burns in my mind, one singular event that permanently severed any lingering affection I had for my family, it happened when I was 17. I had realized early on that if I wanted anything in this life, I would have to bleed for it myself. I desperately wanted independence, and to a teenage boy, independence means a set of keys. For 2 grueling years, I worked 3 different part-time jobs. I mowed lawns in the blistering summer heat. I scrubbed greasy pans as a dishwasher at a local diner until my hands were raw, and I tutored underclassmen on the weekends. I saved every single penny, denying myself new clothes, video games, or trips to the movies with friends. Finally, I had scraped together $2,500. I bought a beat-up, rusty, but mechanically sound Chevy pickup truck from a neighbor. It wasn't pretty. It smelled faintly of old oil and wet dog. The paint was chipping, and the radio only played static, but it was mine. I bought it with my own blood, sweat, and tears. I spent weekends under the hood, learning how to change the oil, replace the spark plugs, and clean the carburetor. That truck was my sanctuary. It was my physical proof that hard work paid off. It was my ticket out of that suffocating house. Then came Julian's 16th birthday. My parents had thrown him a massive, catered party in the backyard. I stayed in my room trying to study. The next morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table eating a bowl of cheap cereal, jingling the keys to my Chevy in my pocket, ready to head to my dishwashing shift. My father, Richard, walked in. He didn't look at me with pride for my work ethic. He looked at me with cold calculation. "Arthur," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument, "leave the keys on the counter. Julian got his license yesterday." I froze. I thought it was a sick joke. "Excuse me? Dad, that's my truck. I bought it. The title is in my name." Richard slammed his hand on the table, making my cereal bowl jump. "Don't you take that tone with me in my house. Your brother needs a safe vehicle to drive to school and hang out with his friends. You are already used to walking to work and taking the bus. It builds character. Julian is younger, he needs the convenience. Don't be so damn selfish, Arthur. It's just a piece of junk anyway." I looked at my mother, Eleanor, who was sipping coffee by the sink. She didn't even meet my eyes. She just softly added, "Be a good older brother, Arthur. It would make Julian so happy." My blood ran cold. The sheer audacity, the blatant, cruel theft of my hard work to serve their golden child was suffocating. I tried to argue, to plead, to explain the hundreds of hours of labor that truck represented. But Richard stepped forward, towering over me, his face red with sudden rage. Keys, now, or you can pack your bags and find somewhere else to live. I was 17. I had nowhere to go. My hands shaking with a rage so profound it made my vision blur. I pulled the keys from my pocket and dropped them on the counter. The metallic clink sounded like a prison door slamming shut. Later that afternoon, I had to walk 3 miles to work in the freezing sleet. As I trudged down the shoulder of the road, freezing and humiliated, Julian drove past me in my Chevy. He honked the horn and flipped me off, laughing hysterically with his friends. I stood there in the snow, watching my truck disappear around the bend. That was the exact moment Arthur, the obedient son, died, and Arthur, the survivor, was born. Are you kidding me? What kind of parents literally steal their kid's hard-earned car just to appease a golden child? That is just sick. How would you guys even react if your own dad essentially robbed you like that? I would have lost my mind right then and there. After the incident with the truck, I knew I had to flee this hellhole as soon as humanly possible, and I poured every ounce of my frustration into my academics. I was looking to pursue a bachelor's degree in finance, aiming for the top tier. Months of relentless studying paid off when I received a thick envelope in the mail. I was awarded an 85% academic scholarship to one of the nation's finest, most prestigious institutions. It was an elite university, the kind of place that practically guarantees a lucrative career for its graduates. Getting a scholarship there. Oh, that is a dream that opens doors you didn't even know existed. But here's the massive catch. The university was several states away. And like absolutely everything else in my miserable life, my parents refused to let me have it. I made the mistake of showing them the acceptance letter, thinking that perhaps, just maybe, the sheer magnitude of a near-full ride to a top 10 university would force them to acknowledge my worth. Instead, they staged what felt like an intervention in the living room. Richard held my acceptance letter like it was a piece of toxic waste. "You're not going," Richard stated flatly, tossing the letter onto the coffee table. "What? It's an 85% scholarship. Dad, it's an Ivy Tier school. I earned this," I argued, my voice cracking with desperation. Eleanor sighed dramatically, putting a hand to her chest. "Arthur, you have to think about the family dynamics. You have to think about Julian." Of course, it was always about Julian. My parents sat there and seriously suggested, no, demanded, that I attend the mediocre, underfunded local community college in our state instead. Their reasoning was so twisted it made me nauseous. They reasoned that since Julian, who was currently failing high school algebra and was not particularly bright academically, could feel insecure and bad about himself if I had the opportunity to enroll at such a prominent, elite college while he could barely get into a trade school. Therefore, to protect his fragile ego, I should stay local and remain mediocre. This kind of entitlement blows my mind every single time. They seriously want to sabotage their own son's bright future just so the golden brat doesn't feel bad about being a failure? What goes through their heads? Do they not hear how insane that sounds? What was stopping Julian? He could have worked his tail off like I did. He could have spent his weekends studying instead of driving around in my stolen truck. He could have received what he desired if he had an ounce of work ethic. However, none of this logic made sense to my parents. They looked me dead in the eye and told me I needed to go to the local college because families stick together and we don't outshine each other. You see how incredibly ludicrous and toxic this whole situation was. Somewhere in my mind, I realized they weren't just doing this to keep me from outshining Julian. It was deeper than that. It was as if they recognized my immense potential, but consciously, maliciously chose to crush it. It's as if providing me with genuine support and allowing me to succeed would completely jeopardize Julian's carefully curated image as the golden child. If the ugly duckling became a swan, what did that make their golden boy? Why else would they work so incredibly hard to force me to stay at a dead-end local college, while Julian, who was nowhere near as ambitious or capable, received unrivaled, blind support? It seemed as if I was strictly forbidden from being more successful than him. That was simply not part of the script they had written for my life. But did I succumb to that foolishness? No. I had already made significant, agonizing sacrifices to keep up with this family's wacky, biased antics. I had sacrificed my childhood, my peace of mind, and my hard-earned truck. But I decided right then and there that I had had enough. The engine of my ambition was roaring, and I was not going to let them cut the fuel line. However, I knew that outright rebellion would result in them making my remaining time at home a living nightmare. I needed to be strategic. I needed to play their game better than they did. So, I formulated a spectacular deception. I walked into the kitchen the next morning, hung my head low, and put on the best acting performance of my life. "You know what, Dad?" "Mom," I said, injecting a tone of defeated resignation into my voice. "I've thought about it. You're right. I don't want to make Julian feel bad. Family is more important. I'll go to the local college." The visible relief and smug satisfaction that washed over their faces made me sick to my stomach. They genuinely believed they had successfully broken my spirit and protected their precious Julian. Richard puffed out his chest, nodding approvingly. "Good boy, Arthur. That's a mature decision. You're finally understanding how the real world works." But then I dropped my condition. "I'll go to the local college," I continued, looking up at them. "But on one strict condition. I can't study in this house. It's too distracting. If I'm staying local, you have to permit me to live in the campus dorms, and you need to cover the tuition costs here since I'm giving up my scholarship." My parents exchanged a quick look and agreed a little too happily. To them, paying a few $1,000s a semester for a local college dorm was a cheap price to pay to keep me suppressed and out of the house, ensuring I wouldn't cast a shadow over Julian. They thought they had brilliantly persuaded me to stay under their thumb. But did they actually? No chance in hell. Behind their backs, I secretly accepted the scholarship to the prestigious university. I forged some local college housing documents to show my father, securing his financial commitment for the local tuition. When moving day came, I packed my bags, said a brief, emotionless goodbye, and headed to the airport instead of the local campus down the road. I relocated across the country to another state, stepping off the plane into a world of pure, unadulterated freedom. While my parents smugly thought I was sleeping in a cramped dorm a few miles away, attending mediocre lectures, I was sitting in grand lecture halls taught by Nobel laureates. The nicest aspect of this entire grand deception was that the prominent college I was admitted to offered an accelerated intensive finance program. Because I had taken so many advanced placement classes in high school, I was able to complete my degree in just 2.5 years, whereas the local college would have trapped me for a full 4. So that setup was absolutely ideal, since it meant I could graduate, secure a high-paying job, and completely vanish long before my parents ever expected me to finish my basic studies. The clock was ticking, and I was miles ahead of them. Honestly, getting on that plane was the absolute best decision I have ever made in my entire life. Not only did I physically and mentally leave the suffocating hellhole my parents had created, but this elite college represented the absolute pinnacle of prosperity and opportunity. I threw myself into my studies with a ferocity that bordered on obsession. While other students were partying, I was in the library deciphering complex financial models. I networked, I interned at top-tier investment firms during the summers, and I built a resume that was bulletproof. I say this with immense pride because shortly after graduating early, I was heavily recruited. I fielded multiple offers before accepting a position at a massive financial group. Fast forward to today, 18 months after graduation, and I am thriving. I was offered a massive starting salary, and after a wildly successful first year managing portfolios, I received a massive bonus and a promotion. I am now officially pulling in $250,000 a year. Things are improving for me at a staggering rate, and I am currently negotiating to become one of the youngest senior analysts in the firm's history. I did it all on my own terms. The scholarship covered 85% of the exorbitant tuition fees. And here is where my sweet, calculated revenge comes in. I utilized the money my father dutifully contributed every semester, the money he thought was going to the local community college, to comfortably meet my remaining living expenses, buy professional suits, and aggressively invest in the stock market. Now, I am living a fantastic, luxurious life in a high-rise apartment overlooking a glittering city skyline. Meanwhile, my father continues to blindly wire me that local tuition money every semester, firmly believing that I am still a struggling, mediocre student dragging his feet through a 4-year local program. And I have not told him to stop. I know some people might think it's kind of terrible or unethical, but I don't lose a single second of sleep over it. I consider it a heavily discounted form of financial retribution for a stolen childhood, a stolen Chevy truck, and years of psychological torment. It is the absolute least they owe me. For the last 4 years, I've had strictly limited communication with my relatives. There were a few brief, painfully awkward checkup calls here and there, usually just Eleanor asking if I was staying out of trouble, as well as 1 or 2 agonizing, heavily calculated trips back to my hometown over the major holidays just to keep up the charade and prevent them from becoming suspicious. Aside from that necessary acting, they haven't troubled me too much. I've easily been able to avoid them by explaining that I've been incredibly busy with my studies and working part-time. They don't seem to care to investigate anyway. I mean, why should they? They had Julian, their golden child, right there with them. My parents heavily benefited from the fact that the only person they felt obligated to care for was no longer physically in their lives. I was truly, deeply satisfied with the setup. It did hurt, from time to time in the quiet hours of the night, that my own flesh and blood didn't even notice I had moved thousands of miles away. But that fleeting melancholy was entirely offset by the immense relief of not having their toxic, draining presence constantly around me. Truth be told, as I sat in my expensive apartment, looking out over the city I had conquered, I did miss having a family. I didn't miss my dysfunctional family, but rather the universal feeling of having a family who genuinely cared about me, who would celebrate my promotions and ask how my day was. Despite my wealthy friends, my fast-paced career, and my expensive pleasures, I felt that a specific, familial warmth was lacking in my life. However, until this morning, it appeared completely impossible to correct. My father called today. The caller ID flashing Richard made my stomach drop momentarily out of pure habit. I answered, expecting the usual brief, transactional conversation. Instead, he loudly announced that Julian was getting married. "Arthur," Richard barked into the phone, lacking any preamble or basic greeting. "Julian proposed to Chloe. The wedding is next month. I need you here." I was taken aback. Was my father truly urging me to come home? I stayed silent, letting him continue. "I need you to fly back a week before the actual wedding," he demanded, his tone turning into an order. "There is a massive amount of physical labor to be done. We need someone to help set up the venue, run errands, pick up the relatives from the airport, and make sure everything is perfect for your brother. I expect you to be there." For a fleeting, pathetic fraction of a second, I had been looking forward to a moment like this for a long time. A moment where my father told me I was part of the family and that he wanted everyone to be present for a major milestone. I almost became emotional. My parents had never, ever acknowledged me as a vital member of their family unit. They were primarily concerned with themselves and catering to Julian's every whim. But now, my father specifically, aggressively wanted me to attend the wedding. It was briefly overwhelming to receive what felt like an invitation to participate. But then, the cold, hard reality washed over me, chilling my brief warmth. I remembered the stolen truck. I remembered the report card in the garbage. I remembered the sneers, the neglect, the blatant favoritism. I remembered that these were the exact same people who had ignored me throughout my childhood, who actively tried to sabotage my future to protect their golden boy. Even today, as he barked orders at me over the phone, they were completely unaware that their eldest son was a millionaire in the making, living states away in a luxury high-rise. He wasn't inviting a son to share in a family joy. He was summoning an unpaid servant to ensure his favorite child's day went off without a hitch. Do I really want to return to these people, to step back into that toxic environment, only to be disregarded, ordered around, and treated like a peasant again, exactly as I have been my entire life? This is where I find myself in a massive quandary. What would you do if you were in my meticulously polished, expensive shoes? I fiercely miss my sense of family, and it would be wonderful to have them care about me for once, even if it's an illusion. But the prospect of returning back to that house, only to have my expectations brutally shattered again and to be forced to serve the brother who tormented me, absolutely terrifies me. Should I accept their invitation and attend my brother's wedding solely for the sake of biological family, or should I stick to my hard-won commitment to live far away from them, protect my peace, and not allow them to ever hurt me again? Before we get into the absolute chaos that unfolded next, I need to tell you that I took a full 48 hours to seriously consider what I should do. For 2 days, I sat in my quiet, meticulously clean, high-rise apartment, looking out at the city skyline and weighed my options. A tiny, foolish, deeply buried part of my inner child whispered that maybe this was the olive branch. Maybe they had changed. But the rational, adult Arthur, the Arthur who had built a $250,000 a year life from absolutely nothing, knew better. I knew exactly who these people were. In the end, I decided to aggressively protect my hard-won peace. Even though some people out there might disagree with my decision, arguing that blood is thicker than water, I elected not to accept my father's heavy-handed, demanding invitation to Julian's wedding. And honestly, looking back now, it feels like the single most vital, self-preserving decision I have ever made in my entire existence. Spoiler alert, my parents haven't changed. They never will. Let me continue exactly where I left off. After doing some deep, internal thinking, I picked up my phone and sent a text message to my father. I didn't write a long, emotional paragraph pouring my heart out. I didn't offer any elaborate excuses about my demanding work schedule or important financial meetings. I simply typed a single, cold, unbreakable sentence. I will not be able to make it. I hit send. I expected some sort of immediate, negative reaction, but I genuinely did not expect the aggressive, multi-pronged psychological manipulation to start so incredibly early. Within less than an hour, my phone was absolutely flooded with a barrage of text messages, lighting up my screen like a Christmas tree. When texts didn't work, the phone calls started. First up to bat was my mother, Eleanor. I picked up the phone, and instantly, she attempted to unleash a massive, calculated guilt trip. Her voice was trembling, entirely manufactured for dramatic effect. She immediately inquired if I truly, deeply wanted to miss Julian's special, once-in-a-lifetime day. She asked if I genuinely wanted to be known forever as that bitter brother who couldn't put aside his petty jealousies for family. She went on and on about how immensely disappointed poor, sweet Julian would be if I wasn't standing there supporting him. She laid it on thick, stating how much it would mean to Julian's fragile heart if his older brother was there to guide him into this new chapter of life. Really? I had to physically hold the phone away from my ear and laugh silently. She also attempted to play the ultimate, cliché game in which you only get one family card to play in this life. She used phrases like, "We only have each other in this cold world," and "family is forever." But here is the glaring, undeniable truth of the matter. Julian's big day meant absolutely nothing to me. Why? Because Julian had never, not for a single fleeting second, cared about any of my significant occasions. Not one. He didn't care when I graduated high school. He didn't care when I bought my first truck with my own blood and sweat. In fact, he actively stole it from me with a smile on his face. He certainly didn't care when I left the state. And yes, my mother was technically right, you only have one family. But I firmly believe you only honor that family if they actually behave appropriately and treat you with basic, fundamental human dignity. You do not owe your soul to people who treat you like a doormat just because you happen to share DNA. So, I maintained a perfectly calm, icy demeanor. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't scream. I simply informed my mother of the exact same reality I had texted my father. "Mom, I am not coming. Have a nice wedding." I hung up the phone and casually took a sip of my expensive coffee, feeling absolutely nothing but a profound, liberating sense of relief. When Eleanor's pathetic, tear-soaked guilt-tripping completely failed to move the needle, my father, Richard, decided it was time to step in and resort to his own bizarre, aggressive tactics. He called me exactly 20 minutes after my mother hung up. At first, he attempted to keep it relatively calm, playing the role of the stern but reasonable patriarch. He started stating things in a low, measured voice about how mature men handle their differences, and how important families should always stick together on public situations like these, regardless of behind-the-scenes friction. I let him speak for a full 3 minutes without saying a word. When he finally paused for a response, I simply repeated myself, "I am not attending, Dad." When he realized I was an immovable object, he snapped. The facade of the reasonable patriarch vanished in a millisecond, and he decided to play dirty. His voice escalated into a booming, threatening roar that used to terrify me when I was a teenager. He explicitly stated that if I didn't pack a bag, get on a plane, and show up for Julian's wedding to fulfill my duties, they would immediately cease paying my college tuition costs. He didn't stop there. He let his true, ugly colors show perfectly. He explicitly stated that he and Eleanor couldn't afford for people at the country club to gossip about how one of their sons was mysteriously absent at such an important, high-profile social event. He complained that the neighbors would ask questions, that his business partners would look at him funny, and that it would reflect poorly on his parenting. Essentially, they desperately wanted to maintain the flawless, polished appearance of a happy, unified, wealthy family for their superficial friends and nosy neighbors. Wow. So it's not even about wanting their son there. It's all about keeping up appearances for their rich little golf buddies. The nerve of this guy. Would you guys ever speak to your parents again if they treated you like a literal PR prop? As is customary in my toxic family, absolutely everything revolved entirely around appearances. It wasn't about me. It wasn't even about Julian's happiness. Really, what truly mattered was how the family was perceived by outside observers. That's when I really, truly lost it. But I didn't lose it in a fit of rage. I lost it in a fit of genuine, uncontrollable amusement. I mean, how incredibly selfish and painfully oblivious could somebody possibly be? Threatening to cease paying my education expenses just so I could serve as a living, breathing prop to make them look good at a party? It was incredibly foolish. But it was even more hilariously pathetic given the massive, world-altering secret I was sitting on. I didn't care about a single penny of the money they handed me. I leaned back in my leather office chair, staring out at the breathtaking view of the financial district from my window, and I responded in a voice dripping with absolute, unapologetic defiance. "Go right ahead, Dad," I said, a dark chuckle escaping my lips. "Stop paying the college fees right this second. Call the bank. Cancel the wire transfers. I am not coming to the wedding, and absolutely nothing you say, nothing you threaten, and nothing you do will change that." I still hadn't told them that I had graduated over a year and a half ago. I hadn't told them I was living states away, crushing it in the corporate world with a $250,000 salary, living a life of luxury and independence they could never have provided for me, even if they had wanted to. I didn't want them to know how incredibly good my life was, or where I geographically was, because knowing them, they would actively try to ruin everything that was going well for me. I knew I had to tell them the truth eventually, and I planned to do so shortly, but right at that exact moment I was having far too much fun playing with him. My utter unwillingness to attend my golden brother's wedding, combined with my complete, shocking indifference to his financial threats, enraged him beyond human comprehension. He started screaming into the receiver, spitting venom about how incredibly ungrateful I was, how I've always been a difficult, stubborn disappointment, and how he planned to personally drive down and withdraw my name from the local college the very next morning just to teach me a brutal lesson about respect. He said it as if it were a massive, life-destroying threat. He spoke as if being forcefully pulled from a mediocre institution I'd never even set foot in would utterly destroy my future and leave me begging on my knees. He had absolutely no idea that the truth was the exact, spectacular opposite. Honestly, as he continued to rant and rave, I couldn't stop laughing. I could have told him right then and there that I had never attended the local college. But where's the fun in that? So, I simply hung up the phone while he was mid-sentence. Now, I was simply waiting for my arrogant father to go and try to withdraw my name from a college where I was never, ever enrolled. I knew it was only a matter of hours before the inevitable explosion. The never-ending, exhausting drama in my life was about to reach a crescendo that I had meticulously orchestrated. After our explosive phone call, I had a very strong feeling my father would take my defiance seriously. His massive ego couldn't handle being dismissed, especially by the son he viewed as entirely beneath him. Turns out I was perfectly correct. It all began with a frantic, furious phone call from him the very next morning. I let it ring 4 times before I casually swiped to answer. He was irate. He was practically vibrating with a level of rage I had never heard before, and he wasted absolutely no time in demanding answers. It was like witnessing a spoiled toddler throw a massive, destructive tantrum in the middle of a crowded store because he did not get his favorite toy. Only this time, it was a 60-year-old man who was driven completely insane by his utter lack of control over a situation he thought he dominated. Apparently, bright and early that morning, my father had stormed out of his house, gotten into his expensive luxury SUV, and driven straight to the admissions office of the local community college. Yes, this is exactly when the story becomes incredibly fascinating and perfectly satisfying. He marched in there, demanding to speak to the registrar, intent on forcefully withdrawing my name and canceling my enrollment, simply to teach his disobedient son a harsh, unforgettable lesson about financial dependence. That arrogant man was so entirely out of touch with reality that he genuinely believed suspending my imaginary studies would magically force me onto a plane to attend Julian's precious wedding. Clearly, he was catastrophically wrong. Obviously, when my father went to the local college's administrative desk, he was in for the shock of a lifetime. The clerk typed my social security number and full name into their database, only to look up at my furious father with utter confusion. The local college had absolutely no record of my enrollment. None. 0. Oh man, I just love these stories where people get called out on their BS and are completely embarrassed. I bet he looked like a total idiot standing there in his expensive suit. This is pure gold. I had never registered for a single class, never applied for a student ID, and never set foot on their mediocre campus. It must have been quite the spectacular, humiliating scene. I can vividly picture my red-faced, demanding father standing there in his tailored suit, attempting to cancel the registration of a phantom student, arguing with a bewildered college employee who kept insisting that Arthur didn't exist in their system. I bet the massive, crushing revelation hit him like a physical blow to the stomach. During our phone call, his intense bitterness over his public, momentary humiliation at the college office was painfully evident. He was breathing heavily into the microphone, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and profound confusion. "Where the hell are you, Arthur?" he screamed, entirely dropping the polished patriarch persona. "The college says you were never there. Where have you been for the past 4 years? And what the hell have you been doing with all the tuition money I've been sending to that account?" Honestly, the sheer absurdity of the situation, the flawless execution of my 4-year-long deception, was so intensely satisfying that I couldn't stop a genuine, deep laugh from rumbling in my chest. "I asked you a question, you ungrateful little brat," he roared, clearly hearing me laughing at him. "Do you have any idea how stupid I looked standing in that office? Do you have any idea how much money I've sent you? I will call the police. I will have you arrested for fraud." I let him scream. I let him tire himself out, listening to the desperate flailing of a man who suddenly realized he had been played like a cheap fiddle by the son he deemed worthless. I waited for him to pause to catch his breath. The silence on the line was thick with anticipation. It was time. The curtain was finally coming down on this 4-year theater production. After more harsh, pathetic remarks from my father and some deliberate, agonizing waiting on my part, I decided it was time to drop the hammer and tell him the whole unfiltered truth. "Dad," I said, my voice dripping with cold, hard authority, a tone he had never heard from me before. "Shut up and listen to me very carefully." That alone stunned him into silence. "I never went to that garbage community college," I stated clearly. 4 years ago, while you and Mom were busy forcing me to sacrifice my future to protect Julian's pathetic, fragile ego, I forged the housing documents. I accepted the 85% academic scholarship to the out-of-state university, the one you expressly forbade me from attending. I could hear a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, but I didn't stop. I moved states away the day after I graduated high school. I used the tuition money you so generously sent every semester to comfortably cover my living expenses, my professional wardrobe, and my investment portfolio. And because I actually have a work ethic, unlike your golden boy, I accelerated my coursework. I graduated top of my class a full 18 months ago. You lied to us? He stammered, his brain clearly short-circuiting as it tried to process the sheer magnitude of the deception. I survived you, I corrected him sharply. Then, I dropped the absolute largest bomb of the conversation, the one I knew would shatter his ego into a million unrecoverable pieces. And since you are so incredibly concerned about my financial well-being and my career trajectory, let me update you. I am currently an investment analyst at a major Wall Street firm. My base salary, not including my annual performance bonuses, is $250,000 a year. I am 22 years old, and I am already making significantly more money than you. The silence that followed was absolute. It was thick, heavy, and incredibly beautiful. When he finally spoke, he inquired in a weak, trembling voice whether I was kidding. He desperately wanted this to be a cruel joke. But I didn't laugh. I maintained a deadpan, serious silence. He could tell by my unwavering tone that he was facing reality, and he was deeply, profoundly disappointed. He realized it wasn't a joke. The undeniable fact that I was no longer the struggling, dependent, easily manipulated student he thought I was, but rather a wealthy, completely independent man with a wildly fulfilling, lucrative life, must have been an incredibly difficult, jagged pill for him to swallow. I was fully prepared for whatever emotional outburst came next. As soon as my father fully digested and understood the gravity of what I had just told him, he completely erupted. But it wasn't just anger anymore. It was defensive desperation. He started aggressively accusing me of treason for keeping my own family in the dark. He went on a massive, delusional rant about how much he had sacrificed and done for me over the years, only to be confronted with this vicious betrayal. Done so much for me? Was he seriously talking about how he and my mother actively ignored me for my entire childhood to focus all their resources on their favored child? Was he talking about the time he literally forced me to hand over the keys to the truck I bought with my own blood and sweat just so Julian could look cool in front of his friends? Then, when his anger failed to intimidate me, he pivoted. He came up with the most ridiculous, self-serving idea imaginable. His tone suddenly shifted to a desperate, bargaining plea. He said that the only way he could possibly forgive this massive betrayal was if I immediately booked a first-class flight, came to Julian's wedding, and stood by his side to make sure there was absolutely no scandal or gossip about the family. He wanted me to use my new, impressive financial status to elevate the family name. I could not believe it. Even after discovering that I was a self-made millionaire in training, this deeply flawed individual was still primarily, exclusively concerned with his public image. I don't understand why he was so obsessively fascinated with the family's image, considering it was built on a foundation of lies and favoritism. I don't need your forgiveness, Dad, I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. And I certainly don't want to be a part of your pathetic circus, pretending we are all one big, happy family for a bunch of strangers you play golf with. My father, now sounding genuinely frantic, practically begged me to attend. He was losing his grip, and he knew it, but I held my ground like a fortress. I told him there was absolutely no way in hell I'd go to the wedding of the pampered, spoiled brat who devastated my childhood. Not only that, but I informed him I was permanently done with the drama. I spent my entire childhood absorbing your abuse silently, but not anymore. You have only one son, Richard. You made that choice a long time ago. Keep it that way. Do not ever contact me again. I didn't even give him another second to respond or formulate a counter-argument. I swiftly pulled the phone from my ear, ended the call, and permanently blocked his phone number, my mother's number, and Julian's number. And just like that, I was officially cut off from my family's deeply harmful, toxic presence. It was the most satisfying click I had ever heard. For exactly 32 days, my life was a picture of absolute, unbothered tranquility. I poured my energy into my demanding job, closed a massive deal at the firm, and celebrated my success with colleagues who actually respected my intellect and work ethic. I genuinely thought I was completely above all the family drama and manipulation. I thought closing that door and blocking their numbers was the final chapter in the book of my painful past. But toxic people are like a persistent fungus. They clearly couldn't let things go so simply, especially when they realized the massive financial asset they had inadvertently alienated. A few days ago, on a rainy Tuesday evening, my phone buzzed on my kitchen island. I glanced at the screen. It was an unexpected call from an unknown, out-of-state number. Normally, I would let it go to voicemail, but expecting a call from a new client, I swiped to answer. "Hello," I said professionally. There was a sharp gasp on the other end, followed immediately by the sound of someone sobbing uncontrollably. It wasn't a subtle cry. It was a loud, theatrical wailing. It was my mother, Eleanor. She had clearly borrowed someone else's phone to bypass the block I had placed on her number. My initial, hardwired instinct was to instantly hang up the phone. But I paused. I held the receiver to my ear, listening to her hyperventilate, because a part of my rational brain suspected that something genuinely, physically horrible had happened. Someone was dead or in the hospital. Why else would the incredibly proud, image-obsessed Eleanor reduce herself to weeping to the son she despised? But it was nothing like that at all. As her sobs subsided into dramatic sniffles, she began spinning a wildly unbelievable narrative. She started telling me how much she deeply, achingly misses me. She cried out that she simply wants her firstborn boy back in her arms. She explicitly stated she didn't care what I or Dad had fought about, and that none of the past arguments mattered to her anymore. She simply wanted me to be a beloved, integral member of the family again. She even threw in an apology for any misunderstandings in the past. I stood there in my kitchen, utterly perplexed. I mean, where in the world was this intense, loving maternal energy previously? Where was this energy when I was a teenager working 3 jobs? Where was this energy when my father stole my truck? When I explicitly told them over a month ago that I was cutting them off forever, they didn't seem to mind at all. In fact, my father had threatened me. And now, suddenly, my mother is desperately weeping, practically begging to patch things up? My analytical mind, the same mind that dissects complex financial markets, immediately recognized the massive red flags. Don't you think that was a bit incredibly suspicious? People like Eleanor do not experience sudden, magical changes of heart unless there is a severe, underlying motive. So, I didn't give her the satisfaction of an emotional reunion. I kept my voice flat, completely devoid of empathy. "I'm busy, Eleanor. I'll call you later." I hung up on her mid-sob and immediately blocked that number too. But my curiosity was intensely piqued. I had a profound, nagging sense that something was structurally, fundamentally wrong back in my hometown. They wanted something, to find out exactly what kind of disaster had struck. I bypassed my parents entirely and contacted my Aunt Martha, my mother's older sister. Martha had always been relatively neutral, a sensible woman who largely stayed out of my parents' ridiculous drama. I called her up, exchanged brief pleasantries, and gently asked if she had any idea why Eleanor was suddenly acting like a grieving, desperate mother. What Aunt Martha told me over the next 20 minutes was so incredibly bizarre, so perfectly catastrophic, that it verified absolutely every single one of my worst suspicions. I sat on my sofa, gripping my phone, as Aunt Martha unloaded the absolute mother of all plot twists. It turns out, my parents' perfectly curated golden world had completely and spectacularly imploded. Apparently, Julian's highly anticipated, incredibly expensive country club wedding was an absolute, unmitigated fiasco. In fact, it never even happened. The massive storm that hit my family didn't come from me. It came from the very person they had welcomed with open arms. Julian's seemingly beautiful, charming, upper-class fiancée, Chloe, turned out to be a full-fledged, highly sophisticated fraudster. According to Martha, Chloe wasn't from old money at all. She was a professional con artist who had targeted Julian specifically because he was incredibly naive, easily manipulated, and had wealthy, image-obsessed parents who were eager to please him. In the months leading up to the wedding, Chloe had slowly, masterfully manipulated the entire family. She had pitched an exclusive, once-in-a-lifetime, offshore cryptocurrency and real estate investment opportunity to Julian. Julian, desperate to prove he was a savvy businessman like his father, practically begged my parents to get involved. Richard, blinded by greed and his absolute, unwavering faith in his golden son's judgment, took the bait hook, line, and sinker. Chloe persuaded Richard, Eleanor, Julian, and even a handful of their wealthy country club friends to liquidate their assets and put all of their life savings into this massive, dodgy investment fund. And guess what? It was all a meticulously crafted, devastating hoax. The week before the wedding, the exact week my father had demanded I fly home to help set up, Chloe completely vanished. She took every single penny of the investment money, emptied the joint accounts she shared with Julian, and dipped. Wait, what? Oh my God. The golden child's perfect little fiancé was a professional scammer. She took everything. I mean, they completely deserve it. But wow, that is a plot twist I did not see coming. She ghosted the family, the wedding planners, the caterers, everyone. There was no wedding. There was no investment fund. She's gone, probably sitting on a beach in a country without an extradition treaty. And so are my family's entire life savings. However, the absolute poetry of this karma wasn't even close to being finished. My aunt also informed me that my parents were in even more serious, critical difficulty than a canceled wedding and a stolen savings account. Apparently, when the reality of the scam hit, Richard panicked. His logistics firm was already struggling, bleeding money due to his poor management. Desperate to cover the massive hole Chloe had blown in his personal finances and to keep his business afloat, he made a fatal error. He provoked a massive, public disturbance with a key employee and his family, resulting in a massive lawsuit and a significant, unrecoverable loss for his already dying firm. To make matters infinitely worse, in a final, desperate, gambling attempt to salvage his failing company and maintain his wealthy facade, Richard used their massive, multi-million-dollar suburban home as collateral for a high-interest, predatory loan. However, because his business collapsed completely in the wake of the scandal, this massive gamble also backfired on them. The bank foreclosed. My parents lost the business. They lost the savings. And within 3 weeks, they lost the house. Martha told me they were forced to pack whatever clothes they could carry and move out, because their credit was utterly destroyed and they were practically penniless. They had to move into a dilapidated, rusty trailer park on the absolute outskirts of town, because a cheap studio apartment was literally all they could afford. As I sat there, listening to Martha detail the utter annihilation of my toxic family's empire, everything suddenly, perfectly clicked into place for me. This is exactly why Richard was so incredibly aggressive and eager to invite me to the wedding a month ago. He wasn't inviting me out of love. He was already drowning in debt. The business was failing, and he desperately wanted to salvage his crumbling public image by demonstrating to his investors and friends how much he treasured his perfect, unified family. He needed me as a prop to project stability. But of course, that did not work. This massive, public fiasco between Julian and his con artist fiancée just added a nuclear bomb to the negative news surrounding my father. Now, the picture was crystal clear. My mother didn't call me sobbing because she suddenly realized the error of her ways, or because she missed her eldest son, or because she wanted to make amends for a lifetime of abuse. They urgently, desperately needed me. They had realized, through our last phone call, that the son they threw away was currently sitting on a $250,000 salary and a massive investment portfolio. They wanted to use me as a human safety net. I understood everything with absolute, chilling clarity. They were completely out of options, drowning in the consequences of their own vanity and greed, and I was their only hope for a financial bailout. Well, I absolutely wasn't playing that game. I was not going to be dragged back into their toxic, radioactive mess, especially now that I had seen the whole pathetic picture. They didn't care about me for 22 years because they were too busy catering to Julian and his every pampered need. But here is the absolute best, most hilariously satisfying catch of the entire saga. My parents are now viciously, relentlessly fighting with Julian. According to Martha, Richard and Eleanor completely blame Julian for everything. They blame him for bringing a criminal into their home, for the entire wedding fiasco, for convincing them to invest, and for losing every dime they had. The golden child, the perfect son they built their entire lives around, the boy they stole my truck to appease, has successfully ruined absolutely everything. And to be completely, brutally honest, it made me profoundly happy that they were finally, agonizingly realizing their massive mistakes while living in a rusted tin can. Anyway, I could care less. I decided to stay entirely out of the controversy. After my mother called, I made sure every possible number associated with them was permanently blocked. I wasn't going to let them control my emotions or my bank account ever again. But did this logical, firm boundary prevent my parents from desperately reaching out? No, absolutely not. They were needy, clingy, and completely refusing to accept that things weren't going their way for once in their privileged lives. Exactly 1 week later, the doorbell to my secure, luxury apartment building rang. The concierge called up, sounding confused, saying my parents were in the lobby demanding to see me. Do not ask me how they found me. I'm not entirely sure how they got the exact address in a city halfway across the country, but I strongly believe they aggressively badgered some of my old high school friends on social media for the information. However, how does not matter. What matters is that I told the concierge to send them up, purely so I could end this face-to-face. When I opened my heavy mahogany door, Richard and Eleanor stood there. They looked 10 years older, haggard, and desperate. They immediately launched into their rehearsed script, reminding me of family values, and boldly claiming that as their successful older son, I was their ultimate responsibility, and now, somehow, their massive debts were mine to fix. They literally begged me to write them a check, claiming they were entirely penniless, living in a trailer, and had spent the absolute last of their scraped-together money on cheap budget airline flights just to meet me and plead for mercy. I looked at the people who had made my childhood a living hell. I felt absolutely zero pity. That really sucks for you, I said, my voice as cold as ice. But I'm not a bank for people who treat me like garbage. I didn't let them say another word. I slammed the heavy door directly in their faces and locked the deadbolt. But this is not the absolute end of it. A few days later, the ultimate punchline arrived. Julian showed up at my door. The golden boy himself, practically crying, his designer clothes looking unwashed, pleading for my help. He stated, through pathetic sobs, that he missed having his big brother in his life. I leaned against the doorframe and laughed in his face. I'm not sure what big brother you're referring to, Julian, because all I remember is a spoiled brat who bullied me and stole my Chevy truck when I was 17. Julian paled, but he kept begging, saying Mom and Dad were going to physically kick him out of the trailer shortly because they were so violently angry with him for putting them into this massive problem. He had nowhere to go. He wanted to crash on my couch and borrow money. It was all for nothing. Julian shared the exact same fate as my parents. I looked him dead in the eye, the satisfying weight of 22 years of injustice finally lifting off my shoulders. Get off my property, I warned him, my voice low and dangerous. If any of you ever return here, I will have you arrested for trespassing. Enjoy the trailer park. I locked the door in his face. Since that deeply satisfying moment, I haven't heard from a single one of them, and I honestly don't care if I ever do. I am permanently done with this toxic family. I'm a little sad, somewhere deep down, that things with my biological family had to come to this, because the void they created in my childhood will always be present in my life. But I am absolutely not going to take their trash, their abuse, or their debt anymore, just for the sake of the word family. I built my empire myself, and I am going to enjoy every single second of it in peace. I am so incredibly happy for Arthur. This guy survived an absolute nightmare of a childhood and built an empire from the ground up. Honestly, I cannot even fathom the level of delusion his parents operate on. To steal his truck, to force him to give up an Ivy League scholarship, and then have the audacity to demand he bails them out after their precious golden boy ruins their lives? Absolutely not. They made their bed and now they get to sleep in it, in a rusty trailer park. I mean, think about the truck for a second. A 17-year-old works 3 jobs, scrubs dishes until his hands bleed, saves up his own money, and his dad just snatches the keys to give to the younger brother because he needs to look cool? That is not just bad parenting. That is straight-up theft. It is malicious. It shows a complete lack of respect for Arthur as a human being. And then they wonder why he ghosted them for 4 years? The entitlement is just suffocating. Arthur played them like a fiddle, and it was a masterpiece. I hope he is sitting in his luxury apartment right now, looking at the city skyline, knowing he won at life. Some people simply do not deserve to be parents. And Richard and Eleanor are at the top of that list. User Not Your Average Joe says Arthur was a bit too harsh at the end. That kicking Julian out onto the street was too far. Are you serious, Joe? Did we even read the same story? Julian literally tormented Arthur for years, stole his car, and flipped him off while doing it. Why on earth should Arthur risk his peace and his sanity to help a grown man who never lifted a finger for him? Honestly, you have way too much sympathy for bullies. User Karma is Real says they cheered when the dad found out Arthur was making $250K. Yes, I felt the exact same way. That moment was everything. The fact that the dad tried to pull the plug on his tuition, only to find out Arthur was already light years ahead of him, is the sweetest karma imaginable. Good for you, Arthur. Keep thriving and never look back.